You're listening to Beyond the Dose, the podcast where healing, self-discovery, and transformation intersect. Hosted by Michelle Harrell and brought to you by PurpleCityExperience.com. Each episode explores the power of psychedelics, science, and soul work to help you reconnect with your purpose. It's time to go deeper, beyond the medicine, beyond the noise, beyond the dose.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Harrell, your host for Beyond the Dose. Welcome back to another week. This week, I'm very honored and excited to have Gwendoline Van Doosselaere join us. Gwendoline is a divorce coach and mentor and runs Artemis Coaching. And Gwendoline and I met through one of my local networking groups here in the Portland metro area. And we met for coffee and we just discovered that we had so many things in common, namely divorce, which, I think is a story a lot of women share. And as we were chatting and I was getting to know Gwendoline, I just thought, gosh, there's so many parallels between what we go through in a divorce and the transition and all the things that women and men go through during a divorce that are parallel to kind of a psychedelic experience and a psilocybin experience. And so I thought it would be great to have Gwendoline on. I myself, as many of you know, if you've been tuning into my show and following me online, I myself, my divorce was the catalyst for a lot of transition and transformation and change in my own life. It was what I like to call the beginning of my healing process, which sounds odd, but it really was. And I suspect that's true for a lot of people, kind of breaks us open. And so yeah, I wanted to have Gwendoline on to talk us through what is divorce coaching and why would I want it and how she can help others and to, share that story. So Gwendoline, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm really honored to be here. And I also adored our conversation and our coffee talk.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to get to do this in a different format with you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't know if how you want to kind of begin, maybe tell us a little bit about your story and how that led to you becoming a divorce coach.
Yeah. So my divorce story, like so many people, came after really years of deep contemplation and realizing something just didn't feel right in my marriage. And the thought of actually divorcing was devastating. So I kind of had it in the back burner for a long time. And I did everything I could get my hands on to remedy my relationship, to what was the internal work that I needed to do, what could I do differently. And I mean, honestly, it was years in the making. And I would say to my partner or my ex, I'd be like, I love you, but I don't like how you're treating me, and I don't feel good with how you're treating me. And so I finally made the decision to divorce. And when I was still very much, I still loved him. There's this misnomer that you divorce once you don't love somebody. And on the contrary, I had to learn that like you can love somebody and that still isn't enough. It's not enough for a healthy relationship. And some of the pivotal moments in my divorce journey were like looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself anymore. And like I didn't even have flush to my face. I looked like I wasn't alive. I looked really gray. And I was realizing that I was stuck in this mode of the survival mode, and that my kids were only ever getting to know me in survival mode. They weren't at all getting to know me as an actual human, as the fullness of me. And so, like for so many women, I find that our kids are usually a huge motivator for actually divorcing, for wanting them to get to know us and to have a different example of what a relationship and what a joyful home life can look like. And before, I think it's important to kind of note this because I know that so many people are stuck in divorce indecision, and it's devastating.
It's paralyzing. Yeah.
And it's really paralyzing. And some of the things that I found myself thinking were, oh, maybe in my next lifetime I'll be happier. Maybe in my next lifetime I'll be in a happier marriage. And so, just the pain or the thought of divorce was so catastrophic that I was willing to entomb myself in this unhappy life that I was currently in. And I had these rescue fantasies that somebody was going to come and pluck me out of my life, pluck my kids and I out of my life. And everything changed when I realized that no one's coming. No one's coming to rescue me. The only person who's going to rescue me is me. And once I could accept that and really accept that, I used to say this to myself, I just have to put on my big girl panties. This is really what this moment is calling for. And I realized that divorce is, yes, it's the end of a marriage, but what it really is a super deep spiritual journey. And it's an invitation to become the fullest, most responsible, supremely sovereign version of yourself. And to realize that this lifetime is your responsibility, and how you live and how you walk through this lifetime is yours.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fear, there's huge fear that accompanies divorce, but there's a difference between the fear of be careful with this knife, you're going to cut yourself, don't step on the edge of a cliff, and the fear of becoming. And I luckily have had the experience of meeting the fear of becoming. So I realized that was the bigness of that fear was commensurate with the fear of metamorphosis and transformation. So it was so big because my potential to transform was so big.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were so many things you said in there that I wanted to touch on, like the joyful home, bringing joy back. For me, I know that was a big, my ex and I were stuck in this, I don't know, constant bickering, constant scorecard keeping and bickering and I just at some point thought this is not a healthy model for my children, and to your point, I also was the instigator for our divorce. And I think there's this misnomer that the one who wants the divorce, it's easy for them, or it's an easy decision, or whatever the case. I think a lot of people have these assumptions, but honestly, I was devastated as well. And I think if you have children, especially, I think nobody gets married and wants to tear their family apart. And, the thought of my kids having to go back and forth between their dad and I, and not being or having to choose who to spend a holiday with. I didn't want that, right? None of us want that for our families. And so I think what you said is just wanted to reiterate that for the listeners, that anyone who's out there struggling with that decision, at the end of the day, I thought I'd rather have my kids see healthy joy back return to the home, and that might have to be in two separate homes, than living through the day-to-day kind of survival and just a loveless marriage, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some, there's so much that we're going against, so many cultural scripts that we're going against in divorce, which is why it also feels really excruciatingly painful, because you kind of realize oh my gosh, everything that I learned about how to be, everything I ever thought about love, life, relationships, myself, I thought if I behaved in these
Yeah.
ways, life was supposed to be good,
Yeah.
was supposed to be rewarded. And you just kind of realize that playbook doesn't actually work. And so there's a deep sense of betrayal of oh my gosh, I've been following the wrong rules this whole
Yeah.
time. And there's so much research that's coming, because we hear an intact home is better. And there's actually so much that speaks to how a home with conflict, even silent conflict, is really devastating for kids. It's really devastating for us.
Yeah.
Um, so I like it when the research catches up with
Yeah, yeah,
everybody's
yeah.
lived
I mean,
experience.
it's the same in all aspects of life. I think anytime there's no purpose or foundation of love, even in your day, in your job or in your career, how many people get up and go to a job that they hate just out of survival and to pay the bills, right? But that eats at you after a while, at your mental health, at your spirit, and so just like anything, at some point you become so uncomfortable that you're forced to make change, even if you're not ready for that change.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I know I was scared. I was completely scared and panicked about being a single mom with a mortgage, and all of the things, that the financial things that represents as well, which I'm sure a lot of men and women go through. And I think the stat is it takes 10 years or something to recover financially from a divorce.
Yeah, and there's another, the two statistics that I like to put in contrast are that women women initiate 7 out of 10 of the divorces. So 70% of divorces initiated by women, and yet they can anticipate to face about a 40% decrease in their standard of
Mm-hmm.
living. So the economic hit is real. All that to say that like we're still navigating the real world with real material
Mm-hmm.
needs, and which is why divorce is more strategic than just it's strategic and emotional.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk a little bit about that transition and what happens, what you see a lot of women, how they shift and change and grow during this process, because it is a huge, just like any life quake, I call them life quakes, any big
Yeah.
shift in your life, at first can be very destabilizing, a lot of fear, a lot of stress and worry involved. But if you can lean into finding the positives, lean into faith, for those who have faith, you know, the growth and the transition still carries you through. But what do you see a lot of women kind of coming in with and then coming out of the other end with?
Yeah, so the identity transformation is huge. And obviously there's the external one of we're going from being kind of a wife and being partnered to now we're single, we're a single parent, and that has a bunch of ramifications. But what I think is maybe most interesting and what I really love to be a witness of is how I see women transform internally.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of big transition areas, and one is in how much space women allow themselves to take within themselves. There's so much that we're taught to accommodate. We're taught
Mm-hmm.
to kind of cede the space to the other person, especially to men. And I speak more to hetero relationships than same sex. And so what happens, and this becomes really important in negotiations. It's like if you're negotiating from a place of smallness within yourself, you're typically not advocating for what you actually really need to survive. So a big part of the work is working with women to take up the fullness of their beings within themselves and to see how they've been contorting or shape
Mm-hmm.
shifting. And this beautiful transition that happens is that women kind of stop apologizing for taking up less space or being like gnarled in the space that they take up. And then they also relearn to see the beauty of their characteristics without pathologizing it. Like we can see, instead of seeing generosity as, oh, you're a doormat, it's like, actually, no, this is a really beautiful
Mm-hmm.
gift. The propensity for deep care and love isn't necessarily a boundary violation or codependence. It's just that these are amazing attributes, and they're not everybody deserves access to them, and that's something that we learn. Um, the relationship to our rage and anger
Mm.
is a
Yeah.
huge identity shift or a huge shift. So, we all know this, right? We have a really complicated relationship to
Yes.
anger and rage for all the reasons. We're not allowed to express it. And we're not allowed to say that we're mad if somebody hurts our feelings. We're not allowed to express like the ongoing inequities that we face as
Mm-hmm.
women, the violence that we're confronted with. But I find that a really critical part of the divorce journey is when women actually accept and acknowledge the anger that they feel. And they're like, this really pisses me off. And oftentimes how I hear it is women are like, I'm sorry, I'm not usually so angry. And I'm like, you should be
Yeah.
angry.
Yeah.
Like, this is an appropriate
Mm-hmm.
reaction and an appropriate emotion. And so once they can step into that, instead of continuing to kind of swallow all these years of having been dismissed or denigrated, it shifts, because anger is a really catalyzing emotion in this transition specifically.
Well,
Um,
and I don't know about you. I find
Mhm.
often in the work that I do with psilocybin clients, definitely, there's a lot of unmet rage and anger that women have that comes up and surfaces. But what I find often is underneath that is deep sadness and grief. So it's like you
Yep.
have to go through that. You got to go through the rage to get to the grief and the sadness so that you can release it. And I'm curious, do you find that as well, as with your clients?
I do. And what was really interesting for me is that uh, in my personal journey, I do have still a very complicated relationship with anger. And and sometimes that's also in contrast of having been with a really angry partner,
Mhm.
because it's like you want to be the opposite of
Mhm.
what that partner is. But what was happening for me is I would meditate or try to meditate with two young kids, and Kali, the Hindu goddess Kali, just started to appear in my meditation spaces. And it's like she was popping in, and it was really honestly, it was really shocking because I was like, this is not my background. I don't know where she's coming from, but she kept popping up in my life. And when I realized, what she signifies, and that she is the goddess of like using anger for
Mm.
transformation and a call for deep transformation, I was like, my psyche is going through something that my external self is maybe not wanting to connect
Mhm.
to. And I actually find that that's not an uncommon experience for women going through divorce.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and it is grief and it is sadness, but grief and sadness aren't necessarily motivating emotions.
Mhm.
So I find that anger comes in
Mhm.
couples with it to move you
Yes.
to that next
Yeah, no,
place.
I agree, and I think I mean, often when I work with couples or individuals that are, coming in with some relationship stuff, the resentment that is built over years and years of unspoken boundaries, not taking accountability. To your point, I think a lot of us as women, we are raised to please, to bend, and to yeah, do everything for everybody else, and often put our own needs and things to the side, or we push those down, but the resentment still lives on. Like, the resentment stays. Women are I think we're, and that's where I think we also have to take accountability a little bit for our own,
Hmm.
not speaking up,
Yep.
not taking accountability for our own feelings and actually voicing them. And then when it starts to happen, that's usually when, trouble in the marriage. At some point, I think women get to an age where they're like, screw this. I'm tired, right? Like, I'm tired of being everything for everybody, and it's time for me to, like, start speaking what I need, but then that is not always met with, open arms.
Warmth and
Yeah, I mean,
acceptance.
because if you haven't been doing that for the first 10 years of your marriage and then suddenly you start to do it, it's like, "Whoa, wait a second," right? And, I mean, and so many of us trauma bond when we're young. I mean, I
Hmm.
know I did. It's very clear. Hindsight is so clear, right? Hindsight's so it's like
Yes.
you look back and you're like, "Oh my gosh, it's so obvious why I married this person and why he was attracted to me," right? And, like, both of us were trauma bonding, but if you don't continue to grow in that together in the same direction, then yeah, it's
Yeah, and this is kind of a later divorce journey identity shift that it's really hard to go through it at the beginning of
Mhm.
divorce. Like it's something that comes
Yeah.
after a couple of years of reflection. Um and I will say that one of the patterns that I see is that the person who initiates divorce, and that is also true for men, tends to be the person who overfunctioned in their
Mm.
relationship. And so, you and I'm not saying this with any judgment or trying to bring shame to it, but when you kind of break down that dynamic, one of the archetypes that's helpful for women to identify with is the archetype of the martyr. And it's like, yes, we're socialized to sacrifice ourselves for love in our relationships, and there are a lot of parallels with the overfunctioner. So you're taking responsibility for yourself, you're taking responsibility for your partner's emotions, for everyone else's
Mm.
emotional landscape and psychological landscape. And the divorce journey really requires you to know what's yours to control and what's not. And so, energetically or emotionally, spiritually, it's like you've got to tuck yourself back in yourself.
Mhm.
And you are responsible for just what's happening here. You're not responsible for this other person in the space between you and this
Mhm.
other person. And so it's really hard to it's a really hard thing to begin to learn and to just be like, well, I'm not going to overfunction for my ex. I'm not going to, they're responsible for their parenting. They're responsible for the logistics. Like maybe my kids they're not going to pick them up at school because they're going to forget. And, we want to protect our kids, but our, if we continue to protect somebody from
Mhm.
themselves, A, they never get an opportunity to grow and learn. And B, and this is really hard in the parenting journey. Our children deserve to fully know who the other parent
Mhm.
is. Um, and this, this actually connects to another big piece of the identity shift, is the motherhood
Mm-hmm.
journey. And I'm seeing more and more that's being talked about it. But so many of my clients, when they come to me, they have really deep motherhood
Mm-hmm.
wounds. And part of it is, and again, I do work with clients who are going through more difficult scenarios. So there are elements of coercive control all the way up to like verbal and
Mm.
emotional abuse. So they've had to mother performatively. They've had to mother for the male gaze, for male comfort. They've been ridiculed for their instincts. They've been denigrated for it. They have these protective instincts that are like, something is not right. Something is not safe here. And they're gaslit both within their marriages and also in therapy spaces or in our larger society, when their whole body is like, at minimum, what's happening here is really immature, but it can also be really
Mm-hmm.
unsafe. And so in divorce, like, there's a lot of grief for moms to be able to kind of acknowledge that their protective instinct was telling them that something wasn't okay for their
Mm-hmm.
kids. And the other side of that grief is that it can also be really affirming, and they get to kind of really step into the fullness of themselves as moms. And it's a really beautiful transformation,
Yeah.
a really important
But
one.
also a very difficult one, right? I think I don't want
Yeah.
to, at least my own, I know, gosh, because my ex and I separated in October of 2017. I didn't have my full kind of like, I call it my eat, pray, love moment, kitchen floor breakdown moment, until like January of 2019. So, but it
Mm.
took that long for me to like, I think that was the start of my healing phase when I had that kind of big breakdown moment. And but that was just the beginning of getting to where I am today. And gosh, all the things I look back and I think, gosh, been so much growth since then. But it is a long journey for many, and it is not linear. There's moments where think you're doing great, and then whoop, you're right back into kind of the grief and sadness, or the anger. I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
how do you manage coaching clients through that, and understanding and giving themselves grace, giving themselves kindness to stumble a little bit along the way.
Yeah, I think visually, a helpful way to both visualize the journey and also visualize our relationship to healing and
Mm-hmm.
trauma is to imagine a spiral. So you may be
Yeah.
going around the circle, like you may be touching the same elements, but you actually need to revisit them multiple
Mm-hmm.
times and through multiple iterations and growth stages, because we're not so many of us are like, all right, I'm going to schedule my healing. It's going to
Yeah.
take 6 months and 2
Yeah.
days, right? And we're like, that's just not how it
Mm-mm.
works. And when you open the door to healing, your body, there's so much wisdom that we have, and there's a lot of we do know how much we can actually take in and transform, and it comes in bites, bits and pieces. And so if you imagine the spiral, it's like, okay, maybe you're going to first touch on the grief and the loss, and then the anger and the rage, and maybe, oh my gosh, the
Mm-hmm.
fear, and you're going to keep cycling through that. And yeah, it's, honestly, I don't think that it ever completely ends. I think it changes shape. Um, because one of the big lessons of divorce is to realize the depth of of the transformation and the depth of all that you're looking into yourself, and realizing like so much of what you're being confronted with goes all the way back to your childhood, if
100%.
not
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
And it's super deep work. It's super deep work. And
If you
I
choose
don't
to
know.
do it, right?
Go
I
ahead.
think not everybody chooses.
Yeah, you can do
Yeah,
it.
I think some people want to just skip through it. They go right back to dating. They repartner up and they relive that same trauma dance. I've seen that happen too. So I don't know about you, but and friends and things, but I think it can be a beautiful catalyst for growth and change if you choose to really lean into that.
Yeah, and that's not to say it's, growth and change is not easy, and it's not, and it definitely comes with stumbling
Mhm.
blocks, and it's actually really painful.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like one of the learning curves or growth edges of divorce is realizing that like you're probably going to live the pain and the joy
Yeah.
simultaneously forever. And instead what you're able to do is to really appreciate the moments of
Mm.
joy. And, it's one of the ways, like for people who are just contemplating at the beginning of the divorce journey, one of the ways that I describe it, because it's so terrifying, right? And I'm like, you are going to come out such a badass version of
Mm.
yourself. And when you look at the divorce community and you look at the people who are divorced, what you find are people who have lived through, great emotional hardship across all sorts of fronts. But what you find are people who are so grateful for the moments of joy, for the glimmers, for the gifts of life. And that's true of people who've gone through great hardship. Is like they don't take those moments for granted
Yeah.
because they know that it's
Yeah.
now. That joy is right now, and there's going to be pain, there's going to be difficulty, but that joy is what carries you through, and you can't belittle it.
Yeah. No. And you're right. That is what carries you through. And I think as if you have children too, it almost complicates the growth or because we're still focused. I don't know about you, but after my divorce, my main focus was my kids. Like I wanted to make sure my children
Yeah.
emotionally were supported through this. I knew that they were having their own pain and their own grief around the loss of their family unit, um, they have their own anger that
Mm-hmm.
often doesn't surface until years later, at least in my case. But yeah, I think as women, we're still often pulled to really focus on them and maybe
Mm-hmm.
shift and kind of put our stuff aside for a little bit. Do you see that pattern with women that they kind of pause on their own growth and their own transformation and pick it back up a couple years down the road after they get their kids through the transition?
Yeah, I think there's you're kind of bringing up so many different things. One is like just the very real practical stuff of like, my God, my kids need to be fed, watered, bathed. They need to go through life, which can feel really
Yeah.
daunting. It's a
Sur-
lot. It's a lot to manage.
Survival. Yeah.
Yeah. And transition days are tough, and like they live the emotion of divorce. I'm years into mine, and transition days just remain
Mm.
tough. It's like they're navigating the emotional landscape of divorce every transition
Mm-hmm.
period. So you got to have a big space for them. But one of the really interesting reframes that I've been navigating with clients is really understanding the timeline of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because divorce is traumatic. It's the second most traumatic thing that we go through in adulthood. And again, so many of us are living through deep emotional scars and having been in survival mode for so long. And the imprint of trauma is it actually takes years to de-escalate your body through
Mm-hmm.
it. And so it doesn't, there's the first layer of kind of curb of becoming beginning the de-escalation of that trauma when you separate. But your body doesn't really begin to get the cues of safety until you're no longer in fight mode. So for some people, it's not until the divorce decree is signed, which can be years after
Mm-hmm.
separation. And what I found is that, what the research is suggesting is that it takes about 4 years for our bodies to come out of just the heightened state of adrenaline and cortisone from a trauma
Mm-hmm.
state. So when you think about like that transition period with your kids and you're like, I have clients who say to me like, I just want to be on my phone. I just need to tune out. I just need to do this. And what that says to me is it's not like they're failing at parenthood. It's just that are still they're still trying to soothe their nervous system through what was utter chaos. And one of the things we also underestimate with divorce is the cognitive load and the impact of trauma on our cognition, and how, people talk about how like I just can't think straight
Mm.
anymore. I can't show up at my job. I can't like it's hard to learn these new skills, and there's a huge cognitive wounding that happens after a traumatic event. And so I do find that women, they judge themselves. They feel like they're not present with their kids, and sometimes reframing that to being like, no, you still need to heal, and you can just couple that relationship a little bit differently and give yourself more compassion and grace, and I think understanding the physiological aspect can
Mm-hmm.
help. And what's true too is that a lot of people take mental health leaves after divorce. They'll take a leave of absence, and I'm saying that just to just to
Try
kind
to
of create the
normalize it.
juxtaposition of how
Yeah.
intense. Yeah,
Yeah, and I wish I would have thought. I mean, I actually got laid off the same week that my ex-husband moved out, which was not not planned and very shocking and
yeah,
traumatic. Um, but yeah, I think that's such a good, because it is a grieving process just like anything else. Like if your spouse died, you would take time off work.
yeah.
And I think we don't think about it that way. We feel, it's like, oh, I don't know. What's the rate now? 65% of marriages end in divorce? I don't know. But if it's become so kind of normalized divorce, but yet we still have so much learning to do about that process and that healing process. And um, yeah, I love the suggestion of taking some leave of absence to give your time to grieve and to heal and figure out who you are. Let's talk about identity shift, because I think that's huge, right?
Yeah.
For anybody going through a divorce, men or women, but we're specifically talking about women today. So, um, I mean, gosh, for me it was like a complete shedding and then a
Yeah.
rebuilding of who do I want to be? Who am I without my, not being a mother, not being a wife. I got laid off, as I mentioned. So for me, I was with Nike for 16 years. They had moved us here from Europe, where I had primarily worked for them for 13 of those 16 were in Europe. And then all of a sudden, I lost my marriage and my job, which after 16 years and at Nike, the culture is strong. So I really felt lost. Like, oh my God, who
Yeah.
am I anymore? Like I'm not none of the things that I had planned for my life, had panned out. So I was like, holy crap, everything that I thought I was is now stripped from me. Where do I go from here? And that is very scary. That is a very disorienting kind of space to be in.
It's really huge. The overwhelming sentiment that I get, I experienced it, I still experience it at times, and I hear from my clients is that they feel abandoned by God.
Mm,
They feel like, they feel like, why don't you love me? Like, why are you putting me through
mm.
so much trial and tribulation? And consistently, like your story of your experience of losing your job, immediately after losing your marriage is it's my experience too. It's so many other
Mm,
women's experiences. So you've got like these two huge
yeah,
traumas that are coupled together. And when we face financial insecurity, it's the deepest abandonment wound. It's like it's a first chakra wound. It's how can I be safe in this world? How can I make my children safe in this world? And so it's kind of why I speak about divorce as a spiritual thing, because you feel abandoned by the very God who's actually orchestrating your
mm-hmm.
transformation.
Amen. Yeah.
And yeah, and so it's like, how um how do I trust? And that ends up being the learning curve, is like, how do I trust? And yeah, what is the
And trust in
what am I
yourself,
thankful God
right?
for?
I think that
Yeah.
so many of us lose trust in ourselves because we made these decisions that led up to this point, right? We chose that partner, we chose that career, we chose maybe the divorce, and then the
Mhm.
guilt, I think too, that comes along if you have children. I think that's even heavier, especially I don't know if men feel that as strongly as women, but gosh, I had so much guilt about breaking up my family and causing my
Yeah.
children pain. I myself am a child of divorce, but I was like 2 when my parents divorced, so I don't really remember my dad ever being in the home. Um,
Mhm.
but I didn't want to cause that same pain for my kids. That was the last thing I wanted to do. And so, yeah, I don't know, there's just so much with it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, one of the questions I have for myself in terms of parenting, is, what do I want to tell my kids about life?
Mm.
What do I want to be teaching them, having seen and witnessed this midlife transformation, and kind of going, the statistic is actually about 50% of
Oh, okay.
marriages end up in divorce. But what that roughly means is that a third of the adult population in the US has experienced
Mhm.
divorce. So it is a very common thing. It's a common midlife transition. Um, And I asked myself, like, so many of us in the US grow up with this idea of like, what you do well in school, you get your degree, you get a good job, you find the love of your life, you get a house,
Mhm.
2.5 cars, kids, whatever, live in suburbia, and then you have enough to retire and buy a boat,
Yeah.
right? Like that's,
Yeah.
but I'm exaggerating, but like it's this linear curve up towards
Yeah.
amazingness.
And it's how we
And
define
then,
success, right? It is how we
and
define
it's how we
success.
define
So when
success.
that is stripped, it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find myself both like how deeply embedded that is in me, and when I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to interrupt this in myself before I say something to my kids. I have to interrupt it in myself and be like, this is actually not what I want to tell them, and what I'm trying to speak to them to. I try to tell them that life is a bunch of valleys and peaks,
Mhm.
and there are going to be some amazing experiences, and there's also going to be some really
Mm.
hard stuff, and that's just true.
Mhm.
And what I'm like, what I try to tell them is that what's really important in life is who you surround yourself with,
Yeah.
and the community and the people that you bring in, because we're going to be challenged and things are not going to go our way. And what really makes you rich is the love. I mean, I'm not, yeah, it's kind of trite what I'm saying, but what really makes you rich in life is the support and the community and the stuff, the people around you. And that's true in divorce too. Like, so much of what we have to do is to reshape our communities and change what we define as meaningful
Mhm.
for ourselves.
Mhm.
And it's big work.
And so let's talk a little bit about like your coaching services and what that looks like. I know you also
Yeah.
have like a divorce school and community that you lead women through. And I think that's so amazing. And it's funny, since I met you, I've met two more divorce coaches, and before I met
Oh, that's
yeah,
interesting.
it's one of those things where like, God or the universe shows you something, and then you see it over and over again, because it was not anything I knew that existed until I met you, and now I've been like, oh, there's more people out there doing this. So I think it's just a brilliant business concept, and I think a lot of us could use that help and support as you navigate it. So tell us a little bit about how you work with clients, what the process looks like, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so I work with clients. My foundation is working with clients one-on-one, and I do work exclusively with women. I tend to work with moms. And what that looks like is meeting at a regular cadence, usually every 2 to 3 weeks that's the pace of divorce. It just
Yeah.
doesn't go much faster. And we talk about and address everything that divorce touches. So sometimes it's really looking at how to work with a lawyer, understanding legal advice, interpreting it, knowing what questions to elevate to your lawyer, understanding the process, the like logistical stuff of putting together a parenting plan, looking at finances and assets, and then also getting a sense of the other professionals that you need to bring
Mhm.
in. So we often need so many people are scared of spending money in divorce, and I understand why. But overwhelmingly, what I find is that people who think that they're going to save on, the $100 or like the $400 an hour consultation with a lawyer do not necessarily do better by the end of their
Right.
divorce. And because again, it is strategic, and you are worth the investment. Um, we we underestimate. We think that the legal system is going to bring us justice and that it's going to understand our situation. And that's just not how it actually works. You have to advocate for yourself, and you have to understand it inside out. So that's the type of support that I offer. And then I understand what people are going through emotionally. I mean, both because I've seen it play, I see the pattern of it now. And one of the big things that I do, going back to the identity conversation, is feel through like, okay, it doesn't look like you really want to address this right now. You keep stepping away from financial conversations, or, every time we talk about your kids, it comes with a lot of grief and sadness. Um, or fear.
Right.
Like sometimes the presence of fear and being scared is really palpable. And it's like, how do we let's I'm not a therapist, so we're not like excavating it deeply, but we're talking about in the way of like, how is this either helping or inhibiting your divorce
Yeah.
decision?
Well,
'Cause
and
it
fear, I
yeah.
mean, anytime we make decisions in a fear-based space, right? That's not where you want to be when making big, tough life decisions. And I think just knowing the questions to ask, because we don't know what we don't know. And
Yep.
if you don't know what you don't know, you've never done this before, you never had to, traverse a divorce before, hopefully. Um, and you're stuck in anger and grief and sadness and fear. It's like, it feels so overwhelming and you don't even know where to begin. So
Mhm.
that's why I think having somebody like you to kind of come along, hold the hands of women, and like, okay, let me be your voice. Let me tell you what questions you need to ask so that you don't have to think about it. Because I think that is, to your point, like so many women are like, I can't think straight. I don't, everything feels
Yeah.
overwhelming. Um, and I think that that's very valid, and that's why somebody like you is such a valuable service, I think.
Yeah, and tied to that, and it's a conversation that I have with divorce professionals fairly frequently is, like financial experts or lawyers or parenting specialists is who we are in the divorce process, like who we are today in the divorce process, is not we don't often really understand what our needs are actually going to be by the time the divorce is final, who we're going to be in 2 to 3 years. And, you're making these really long view decisions today when you're in a state of fear or a state of panic. Or like one of the really common things that I see women do is because they're just like, I just want to be safe and I want my kids to be safe.
Mm.
And I will be with my kids 24/7 and I'm going to have them, all the time. And I want, they're in such this protective stance and it's completely understandable. But there is a time when that's going to become really heavy.
Mhm.
It becomes really heavy to be the prominent, dominant single parent. And it's like, well, you actually deserve some balance in your life. So I just today you may want to push for like 80% parenting time with your kid, but you're going to need to make a living. You probably are going to want some time to yourself because it's really intensive. You might, even though if it feels crazy today, you might actually want to date
Mhm.
again. So to make a decision for you 2 to 3 years down the road to future cast, and we're horribly bad at future casting as humans, these are some of the things that actually, divorced people 2 to 3 years down the road wish that they had made
Mhm.
these decisions differently.
Mhm.
They wish that they had carved out more time for themselves, gotten more childcare support from their ex or from the
Mhm.
community. They wish that they had advocated for the money that they actually need.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are some of the things. Um,
Yeah, and even thinking further down, like, when we divorced, our kids were set when we separated. Um, gosh, how old were they? I can't do math. But they were young. Let's
Probably
say
not.
they were, middle school, and elementary age. And
Okay.
fast forward, they're both in college now. I- We didn't ever talk about college in the, like, as far as the finances and how that would be paid for, or like that wasn't even in my, radar at that point. Like I wasn't thinking that far down the
Mm,
lines as far as like negotiating the financial stuff. And so that became an issue when my oldest
yeah.
was ready to go off to college, and then it was like, oh wait, we didn't talk about how we're paying for college and what you're paying versus what I'm paying, and it became an issue. It became a sticky point. So that's something that I learned. I was like, dang, we should have, I was thinking until they're 18, child support and,
Yeah.
all the financial stuff where I had 18 in my head, wasn't thinking about beyond that. And so, just stuff like that, I wish I would have known to think about, and having a coach maybe would have helped me.
Yeah, or at least anticipate the conversation and then understand, the legal constraints of like, can you actually write this in a parenting plan or not?
Mhm.
And I think not leave things on the table, and that's part of what the Divorce School for Women, the online community that I'm currently creating is. That's the long goal is like divorce. The legal part of divorce is only about 20% of the actual divorce process. Like so much of it is continuing to learn communication
Mhm.
skills with your
Mhm.
ex, understanding how what are you going to do when like you want your kid to play soccer and they don't, and what do you do? So having or like so many women, they feel they need to now they're responsible for car and home maintenance and all these things that have been, historically stereotypically taken that were owned by their partner, and they feel really stupid. And it's like how I want to create, and I'm in the process of creating a community where like there are no stupid
Mhm.
questions, and we just understand that this is a really long process. It's a really deep process, and it is so much better in community.
Yeah. Well, yeah, 100%. I would have loved to have other women to talk to that were going through something similar during mine, It would have been, if nothing else, just for the healing part of it, let alone maybe
Yeah.
advice or tips or things you haven't thought of, but just to have that community of women that are feeling similar things as you at the same time as you're going through it, I think is incredibly, incredibly supportive.
Yeah, it really takes we live divorce, and so many of these things is like this individual failure,
Mhm.
and it really takes it out of the individual experience and kind of creates this collective pattern and script, and you're like, "Oh, this happens to so many other people, and I'm not crazy, and I'm not stupid, and there is a way through, and I can kind of I don't have to live this so emotionally close and with so much
Yeah.
volatility."
Yeah. So I'm curious, do you help women find these resources too? Do you have like a network of, divorce attorneys and therapists and I don't know what
Yeah.
else, but yeah.
So I'm actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm actually in the
Mm.
process of co-creating what we're calling the Portland Divorce Directory,
Oh, that's awesome.
because yeah, so a lot of us have our own referral list of people that we've met, people that we recommend. But what is really missing from the divorce world is kind of the integrated view of all of
Mhm.
the professionals and services that you
Mhm.
need. Everything from the right therapeutic support. So like for so many people who are going through coercive control, you need somebody who's informed, domestic violence informed, or at minimum trauma informed. So it really matters who you surround yourself with. You often need a real estate professional. You definitely need a financial professional. And those concentric, and oftentimes it's just like you don't even realize the total
Mm.
universe of people that you need. And same for the professional network, divorce professionals. It's all these databases, or they live in this, independent lawyer referral system, or maybe there's a real estate listing, but to get them
Mhm.
synergized in a way that both benefits the professional community and the individual community doesn't yet exist. So,
Yeah.
in the process of pulling that
Yeah, I
together.
haven't seen that exist, and I think that is brilliant. And I think we're starting to see that in others, like in the medical,
Hmm.
in our medical care, you're starting to see a more holistic approach to that too, and like treating the person as a whole, not just, the physical ailments, but also what's going on mentally and spiritually and all the things kind of looking holistically. And I think to do that through divorce would be amazing as well, to have that kind of community and place where you could go and kind of pick and choose the pieces that are applicable. But yeah, that I have not seen that. So that is a brilliant idea, I think. Yeah.
And, it's really exciting. I, I'll just leave it with, one of the biggest takeaways that I had after getting through divorce and that I continue to see is that such an underserved experience. We just do not have anywhere near the amount of support, understanding, wherewithal, policies to tackle this huge transformative and traumatic life
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
So I am looking to change
Yeah.
that.
Amazing. So, where can people find you if they want to, utilize your services or talk with you and figure out what if this is the right fit?
Yeah, so currently, they can go to my website, which is Artemis, the Greek goddess. She's the goddess of children and women and of the wilderness. So it is Artemis, divorcecoaching.com. And I'm also on Instagram, LinkedIn under the same name. So you can find me online and book a session with me or send me a message. I love hearing from
Yeah,
people.
and we'll be sure to include all your information too in the notes and everything. So, well, Gwendolyn, I think this might be the great way to end is thinking about what changes for women when they stop fighting the divorce process and learn to accept that
Mm,
this is where they're at, and then really can lean into their next chapter. I'm curious how you see that happen for women.
Um, the vision that's coming forward is a breaking open. Um, it's kind of like this beautiful image of being able to kind of break open at the heart space, and it's not necessarily tears and grief that's coming out. It's this beautiful bouquet of
Mm,
flowers, and it's all of these ways in which all of these beautiful things that they've kind of forgotten about themselves or haven't accepted or haven't wanted to express, and that they can now hold in the center of their being.
yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I see
Well,
so many
thank you.
parallels with psilocybin work. And I mean, because it's a healing process. That's all healing, right? So thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed getting to know you and your work. And like I said, I think this is a big gap in the market that I think you're helping to fill. So thank you for that. Um,
Thanks, Michelle.
yeah, and thank you to everyone who tuned in to another episode of Beyond the Dose. I am Michelle Harrell, and we'll be back again next week with another episode. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Dose with Michelle Harrell. If today's episode moved you, share it, subscribe, and explore more at purplecityexperience.com. Until next time, stay open, stay grounded, and go beyond the dose.